The faded Polaroid slipped from Hudson's fingers like a confession long overdue, fluttering to the dusty floorboards of the old Brooklyn brownstone where secrets had fermented for decades. In the grainy image, two young men in crisp navy uniforms leaned into each other under a San Francisco fog, their smiles defiant against the gray, hands brushing in a touch that screamed louder than any wartime siren. "Who the hell are you?" Hudson whispered to the ghost in the photo, his voice cracking like the spine of the yellowed love letter tucked behind it, addressed in elegant script to my eternal Elias, from a man Hudson had always known as the unyielding patriarch of their family. His grandfather, Victor. Hudson's heart hammered as he traced the ink, the words blurring through hot tears. "If they take you from me, I'll carry this fire alone. But God help me, I'll never let it die." The letter wasn't meant for him, but it burned now in his palm, igniting a fury at the years of silence, the half-truths doled out over Thanksgiving turkeys and 4th of July barbecues. Victor had moved to the nursing home just last month, his sharp mind fraying at the edges like old newsprint, and Hudson had come to pack up the house expecting faded report cards and moth-eaten sweaters. Not this grenade of hidden longing that threatened to rewrite every story he'd ever believed about love, loss, and the men who built their fractured American dynasty. He slammed the drawer shut, the wood groaning in protest, and grabbed his keys, the Manhattan skyline mocking him through the rain-streaked window as thunder rumbled like the echo of a forbidden kiss. By the time Hudson merged onto the BQE, the letter was folded into his jacket pocket, a talisman against the ache blooming in his chest. This wasn't just Victor's secret. It was a mirror to Hudson's own guarded heart, the one he'd armored after his ex's betrayal 2 years back, vowing never to let anyone close enough to shatter it again. But as the wipers slashed at the downpour, Hudson wondered if some fractures were worth the mend, if the old man's unspoken truths could finally free them both from the weight of what America had demanded they bury. Hudson pulled into the parking lot of Willow Creek Manor just as the storm broke in earnest, the rain sheeting down like judgment from a vengeful sky. The nursing home squatted on the outskirts of Queens, a low-slung brick building with manicured lawns that felt more like a subdued country club than a way station for the fading. He'd visited twice since Victor's move. Awkward afternoons filled with small talk about the Mets' dismal season and the latest family gossip. But today, the letter thrummed against his ribs like a second pulse, urging him past the receptionist's saccharine smile and down the sterile hallway lined with watercolor prints of lighthouses and golden retrievers. Victor was in room 214, propped up in a recliner by the window, his once broad shoulders hunched under a threadbare cardigan the color of faded denim. At 87, he still had the hawkish nose and steel-gray eyes that had commanded boardrooms during his days as a mid-level exec at a shipping firm, but the Parkinson's had softened his edges, turning his hands into trembling birds that pecked at the arms of the chair. Hudson paused in the doorway, the scent of antiseptic and overbrewed tea clashing with the phantom smell of his grandfather's pipe tobacco from childhood summers in the Adirondacks. "Grandpa," Hudson said, his voice thicker than intended, stepping inside and closing the door against the murmur of a distant TV game show. Victor's eyes flicked up, sharpening for a split second before settling into that familiar, guarded warmth. "Hudson, boy, you look like you swallowed a storm cloud. What's eating you?" Victor's voice was gravelly, laced with the faint twang of his Kentucky roots that he'd polished away for New York's concrete jungle. Hudson sank into the vinyl visitor's chair, pulling the letter from his pocket like it was a live wire. He held it out, watching Victor's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something deeper, resignation, perhaps, or the ghost of a long-buried relief. The old man's fingers quivered as he took it, unfolding the paper with the reverence of a prayer. "Where'd you find this?" Victor murmured, not quite a question, his gaze lingering on the script as if it might vanish. "The attic. Cleaning up the house. It was in that old sea chest, with your medals and the photos." Hudson leaned forward, elbows on knees, the half-empty space between them charged like the air before lightning. "Grandpa, who was Elias?" Victor's breath hitched, a small sound that echoed louder than the thunder outside. For a long moment, he stared at the rain-lashed window, where droplets raced each other down the glass like tears too stubborn to fall. Then, slowly, he nodded, as if granting permission to a tide he'd held back for 70 years. "Elias was the sun, Hud. The kind that burns you alive and leaves you grateful for the scorch." His voice dropped, weaving through the room like smoke. "Sit back, son. This ain't a story for quick telling. It's the one I buried deeper than my service dog tags. The one your grandma, God rest her, never knew the half of." Hudson settled in, the chair creaking under him, as Victor began, his words unfurling like a flag in forbidden wind. It started in 1943, boot camp in San Diego, where the Pacific sun baked the recruits into something raw and unbreakable. Victor had been 19, fresh off a Greyhound from Louisville, his head full of enlistment posters promising glory and girls in Victory Gardens. But glory came laced with grit. The endless drills, the stink of sweat-soaked wool, the nights when the barracks lights dimmed and the real war began inside, the one against the parts of yourself Uncle Sam deemed unfit for the fight. Elias Hawthorne was the wild card in Victor's platoon, a lanky kid from San Francisco with sun-bleached hair and eyes like the bay at dusk, hazel flecked with gold, pulling you under before you knew you'd jumped. He hailed from a family of dockworkers, Irish-Italian stock that bred firebrands and poets in equal measure, and he quoted Kerouac before anyone outside the beats had heard the name. They collided during a midnight rifle drill, Victor fumbling his M1 under the floodlights, Elias steadying him with a hand on his shoulder that lingered a beat too long, electric as a shorted wire. "Steady there, Vic." Elias had grinned, his voice a low California drawl that wrapped around the nickname like smoke. "Can't shoot straight if you're shaking like a leaf in a gale." From there, it snowballed, shared smokes behind the latrines, late-night bull sessions about jazz records and the lives they might build post-war, dreams whispered in the dark where no sergeant's boot could kick them silent. Elias taught Victor to kiss like it was a rebellion, their mouths meeting in the shadow of eucalyptus groves, salt air mingling with the taste of stolen youth. It was frantic, fumbling, profound, a love forged in the crucible of secrecy, where every touch was a Morse code of survival. "I see you. I want you. We're in this foxhole together." But the war didn't care for poetry. Pearl Harbor's shadow stretched long, and by 44, they shipped out to the Solomons. Victor and Elias bunked close in the belly of a Liberty ship, the ocean a relentless churn mirroring the storm in their veins. Guadalcanal was hell's antechamber, jungle rot, malaria fevers, the crack of Japanese snipers turning boys into ghosts. Elias took a slug to the thigh during a night patrol, the bullet tearing flesh like wet paper, and Victor dragged him back through the muck, his own hands slick with blood that wasn't his, bellowing for the medic while praying to a God who'd never listened to men like them. In the field hospital tent, under the hiss of lanterns and the moans of the dying, Elias gripped Victor's hand, fever-bright eyes locking on. "Promise me, Vic, if I don't make it, you live loud." For both of us. Victor swore it, sealing the vow with a thumb across Elias's knuckles, the only sacrament they dared. Elias pulled through, scarred but unbroken, and in the stolen hours of recovery, their love deepened into something mythic, a tether against the abyss. They wrote letters in code, hid photos in helmet liners, imagined a post-war world where they could walk hand in hand through Golden Gate Park. No glances over shoulders, no fear of the pink slips that ruined lives back home. But America had other plans. Discharge came in 46. The war won, but the peace a minefield. Victor, ever the pragmatist, followed the path laid out. A job at the shipping firm through a veterans network, a blind date with Margaret, Hudson's grandmother, a quiet woman with a laugh like wind chimes and eyes that asked no questions. They married in a civil ceremony in Brooklyn, the reception at a VFW hall smelling of cheap beer and cigar ash. Elias? He vanished into the fog of civilian life. His last letter a postcard from Frisco. The city's the same, but without you, it's just echoes. Write soon. My anchor. Victor couldn't. The letters piled up unanswered, each one a knife twist, until the silence calcified into habit. Margaret gave him 3 children, stability, a split level in the suburbs with a white picket fence that hid the hollow in his chest. He buried Elias in the same vault as his dog tags. Deep, locked, rusted shut. But the fire never died. It smoldered, flaring in quiet moments. A jazz tune on the radio, the curve of a stranger's jaw in a crowd, the way Hudson's own eyes, so like Margaret's, held a flicker of that same unspoken hunger. Hudson shifted in his chair, the vinyl sticking to his jeans in the humid room, as Victor's voice trailed off into the patter of rain. The old man had painted their early love with strokes of vivid ache, the salt-stung nights on troop transports where they'd steal kisses in the engine hum, the way Elias's laugh could cut through artillery fire like a lifeline tossed to a drowning man. But now, Victor's gaze drifted to the letter in his lap, fingers tracing the creases as if mapping fault lines. "You stopped writing," Hudson said softly. Not accusation but invitation, the words hanging between them like bridge planks over a chasm. "Why?" Victor's chuckle was bitter, a dry rasp that echoed off the beige walls. "Fear. Hud. The American dream ain't built for fellas like us. It's picket fences and 2.5 kids, not 2 guys splitting rent on a Haight-Ashbury walk-up." He leaned back, eyes closing as memory pulled him under. Elias understood. He was the dreamer, always talking about hitchhiking Route 66, opening a little jazz club where queers could breathe free. Me, I was the fixer, the one who saw the noose in every sideways glance. The years after the war blurred into a montage of repression. Victor confessed, his voice steadying as the story poured out. Margaret was kind, steadfast, a partner in the performance they both scripted without words. She sensed the distance, filled it with PDA meetings and Sunday roasts, never pressing the bruise she couldn't name. Victor climbed the corporate ladder, shipping manifests his armor, but Elias haunted the margins. A news clipping about a Frisco Beat poet arrested for moral turpitude. A radio report on the Lavender Scare sweeping Washington. McCarthy's witch hunts claiming lives like Hudson's imagined future if he dared come out in high school. By 1952, Victor caved to a summons from his sister in Louisville, a family wedding that dragged him west on a Pullman car, the rails singing a dirge of what-ifs. He wrote Elias one last time from a payphone booth in Ohio, the receiver cold against his ear as he dialed a number from memory. heart pounding like it had on Iwo Jima. Elias answered, voice warm as aged bourbon, and they talked for hours about the club he'd scraped together in North Beach, the lovers who'd come and gone like tides, the scar on his thigh that ached in the fog. Come see it, Elias urged, the plea wrapped in laughter to mask the desperation. One weekend, Vic. No strings, just us remembering how to fly. Victor went. God help him, he went. The train deposited him in Oakland at dusk, the bay a mirror of bruised purple, and Elias was there on the platform, older, leaner, with laugh lines etching his temples like victory scars. They drove the winding road to the city in Elias's battered Ford, windows down, Sinatra crooning on the radio about flying to the moon on a string of pearls. The club was a basement dive called the Midnight Note, walls papered in faded gig posters, air thick with cigarette haze and the wail of a saxophone that wept for them both. That weekend stretched into a fever dream of reclamation. Days blurred in stolen hours, breakfasts of sourdough and strong coffee in hole-in-the-wall diners, afternoons wandering the Presidio trails where eucalyptus whispered absolution, nights in Elias's cramped apartment above the club, bodies entwining with the urgency of reprieve. Elias had built a life in the shadows, patrons who knew the code, a network of artists and outcasts who danced on the edge of raids and ruin. This is us, Vic, he'd murmur against sweat-damp skin. The real America, the one they don't print in Life magazine. But paradise has eviction notices. On the third night, as they lay tangled in sheets that smelled of salt and sack smoke, a knock shattered the idyll. Two plainclothes bulls from the vice squad, tipped off by a jealous ex-patron. They didn't burst in guns blazing. It was subtler, a friendly chat that escalated to cuffs when Elias mouthed off about free speech and the hypocrisy of a nation that sent men to die for liberty then hanged them for loving wrong. Victor watched from the fire escape, heart in his throat, as they hauled Elias away in the squad car, taillights fading into the neon glow. He waited till dawn, bribing a clerk at the station with his life savings, $500, blood money from his first post-war paycheck, for Elias's release on a morals charge that would dog him like a shadow. When Elias stumbled out, bruised but unbroken, Victor held him on the curb, the city's pulse mocking their fragility. You gotta go, Vic, Elias rasped, blood crusting his lip from a resisting elbow. They'll come for you next. Back east. Play the part. Marry that girl. Give her the white dress she deserves. But remember this, us. We're the poem they can't burn. The betrayal wasn't Elias's. It was Victor's own. The cowardice that propelled him onto the next eastbound train, leaving a note on the diner counter. I love you more than stars. Forgive me. He didn't look back. Couldn't. As the Rockies rose like recriminations. Margaret waited at Penn Station with a bouquet of daisies, her smile a balm on his self-inflicted wounds, and he married her a month later, vowing fidelity to the lie. Hudson listened, the room shrinking around Victor's words, the rain a soft applause to the unraveling. You think that was the end? Victor asked, eyes opening to pin Hudson with a gaze sharp as shrapnel. Nah, boy. Betrayal's a slow poison. It festers. The festering came in waves. Victor continued, his narrative gaining momentum like a freight train off the rails. The 1950s were a golden cage. Eisenhower prosperity masking the purges, where one wrong glance could cost a job, a home, a life. Victor threw himself into fatherhood, coaching little league and building birdhouses in the garage, but Elias's ghost rode shotgun in every quiet moment. A company trip to Frisco in '58 brought temptation. He drove past the Midnight Note, now shuttered under a wig shop, the neon sign gutted like his resolve. He didn't stop, but the what-if lodged like shrapnel. Then came the call in 1962, a voice from a nightmare dialed wrong. Elias's sister, calling collect from a hospital in Oakland. Elias had been in a car wreck, she said, ribs cracked, but it was the pneumonia that had him fading, the kind that sank its hooks into weakened lungs. He asked for you, Vic, before the fever. Said to tell you the stars are waiting. Victor flew out on a red-eye, Margaret none the wiser, blaming a business emergency. He found Elias in a ward of beeping monitors and wilted flowers, skeletal under the sheets, oxygen mask fogging with each labored breath. The years had etched him, hair silvered, eyes dimmed, but when Victor took his hand, the spark reignited, fierce and fleeting. You came, Elias whispered, mask pushed aside, his grip iron despite the frailty. Thought you'd forgotten how to chase the wind. Never, Victor choked, the dam cracking after 16 years. They talked in fragments about the club that burned in a '55 fire, the string of bar gigs that kept Elias afloat, the parade of lovers who paled against their memory. Elias confessed his own betrayals, a marriage of convenience to a widow for green card stability, a daughter he'd watched grow up from afar, the bottle that dulled the edges but never erased Victor's name tattooed on his inner wrist, faded but indelible. I waited, Elias admitted, tears carving tracks in the hollows of his cheeks. Every greyhound pulling in, every door swinging open. But you built your castle, Vic. Deserved it. The high drama peaked that night, as monitors wailed and nurses bustled. Elias rallied, propped up for a final rebellion. He made Victor promise to live the truth he'd denied, to whisper their story to the wind if not to the world. And if you ever find someone, Elias gasped, tell him I approve. Love like ours? It's the only revolution worth the blood. Dawn broke as Elias slipped away, Victor holding vigil till the code blue faded to silence. He buried him in a pauper's plot overlooking the bay, the Pacific a vast, indifferent witness. Back in Brooklyn, he mourned with a stiff upper lip, Margaret's casseroles a poor substitute for the grief gnawing his bones. The tattoo became his secret compass, a reminder under starched cuffs. Hudson's throat tightened as Victor paused, the old man's chest rising and falling in rhythm with the labored confession. Outside, the storm had eased to a drizzle, Queens streetlights haloing the window like hesitant spotlights on a stage reluctant to close. That was the betrayal, Hudson murmured, piecing it together, the self-sabotage, the half-life Victor had endured, a love story truncated by the era's iron fist. You let him go to save yourself. Victor's nod was weary, etched with the canyons of regret. Saved myself for what? A life of echoes? He reached for the water glass on the side table, hands shaking so badly Hudson steadied it for him, their fingers brushing in a moment of raw, wordless kinship. But it didn't end there, Hud. The real storm hit when the family started cracking at the seams. The 1970s brought the unraveling. Victor wove on, his voice dipping into the timbre of a man recounting a fever dream. Stonewall had ignited the coasts, but in suburbia, it was just another headline clipped and forgotten. Victor's son, Hudson's father, Jack, came home from Nam a ghost, hollow-eyed and hooked on the bottle, his own secrets festering like open wounds. Jack married young, too young, to Hudson's mother in a shotgun ceremony that birthed Hudson amid the Watergate scandals, a colicky infant in a world unraveling at the threads. Victor watched his son spiral, the generational poison seeping down. Jack's rages, the slammed doors, the way he'd eye Hudson with a mix of pride and bewilderment, as if sensing the boy's quiet difference, the way Hudson lingered over comic books with shirtless heroes, the crushes on the soccer captain that he'd bury under layers of baseball cards and bravado. Margaret died in 78, ovarian cancer stealing her breath in a hospital bed that smelled of wilted lilacs. Her last words a murmured, "Be kind to him, Vic," leaving Victor adrift in the empty house, rattling like a ship without moorings. Loneliness bred recklessness. Victor found solace in the gay bars of Chelsea, dive joints with names like the Eagle's Nest where leather daddies and wide-eyed twinks mingled under pulsing lights. He was pushing 60, silver fox with a serviceman's build, and the attention was a bomb, fleeting hookups in back rooms that echoed Elias's touch but never filled the void. One night in 82, nursing a Jack and Coke, he met Tommy, a brash Queens kid, 25 with a mohawk and a laugh that boomed like big band brass. Tommy was all fire and no filter, a bartender slinging drinks and dreams of activism, fresh from ACT-UP meetings where he chained himself to lampposts for AIDS awareness. They tumbled into an affair that scorched like summer asphalt. Passionate, perilous, a middle-aged man rediscovering the pulse of desire. Tommy dragged Victor to pride marches, his calloused hand anchoring Victor's as rainbows clashed with NYPD barricades. "You're a fucking warrior, Vic," Tommy would growl post-rally, bodies slick in the sheets of Victor's brownstone. Hid all this time? Time to roar. But betrayal reared again, sharper this time, in the form of blood ties. Jack discovered them one autumn evening in 84, bursting into the house unannounced after a bender, finding Victor and Tommy mid-embrace on the living room rug, the air thick with afterglow and the scent of patchouli. Jack's face twisted shock, disgust, the war's residue exploding in a tirade of slurs that peeled paint from the walls. "Faggot? My old man? Christ. What the hell is this freak show?" The confrontation escalated into violence, Jack's fist connecting with Victor's jaw before Tommy pulled him off, the room a whirlwind of shattered lamps and splintered trust. Victor didn't fight back, he absorbed it, the blow landing deeper than bone, echoing every jeer from boot camp, every raid Elias had dodged. Jack stormed out, vowing disownment, but the damage radiated. Whispers in the family, Hudson's mother spiraling into pills to numb the scandal, the Thanksgiving table forever fractured. Tommy stayed, a fierce anchor, but the poison spread. AIDS was the reaper then, stalking the bars like a specter, claiming friends in waves of grief that Victor chronicled in journals he burned at dawn. Tommy tested positive in 86, the diagnosis a guillotine blade. Victor nursed him through the nights of fever and Kaposi's lesions, holding him as he retched, whispering Elias's old promises of stars and wind. Tommy's fire dimmed slowly, his last words a ragged love-hard, "Old man." For me, for Eli, whoever the fuck that was, gleaned from Victor's fevered mutterings. He died in 88, Victor alone at the funeral, a sparse affair at a chapel that reeked of bleach and hypocrisy. The betrayal culminated in isolation. Jack's reconciliation came too late, a deathbed apology in 95 after liver failure claimed him, leaving Hudson, then 16, to navigate the minefield of half-truths. Victor raised Hudson in fits and starts. Summer visits to the Adirondacks where they'd fish in silence, Victor's stories skirting the edges of his past like minnows darting from hooks. Hudson, grappling with his own awakening. Stolen glances at the lifeguard. The terror of his father's ghost judging from the grave. Found solace in Victor's quiet strength, never suspecting the well from which it sprang. "And now?" Hudson asked, voice raw as he wiped his eyes, the letter crumpled in his fist. Victor's gaze met his, twin hazel depths swirling with the sediment of decades. "Now, it's your turn to carry the torch, boy. Or douse it. But don't hide like I did." The words hung as a nurse poked her head in, announcing dinner, bland trays of mashed potatoes and mystery meat that Victor waved off. Hudson stayed till twilight bled into the room, the two of them sifting through more photos Victor kept in a shoebox under the bed. Elias in a fedora, smirking at the camera. Tommy with a protest sign reading "Silence equals death." A rare shot of Margaret, smiling unknowing, her hand on Victor's arm like a truce. As Hudson drove back to his Bushwick apartment, the city a neon blur of taillights and takeout smells, the weight settled, not crushing, but clarifying. His own life mirrored the fractures. The ex, Ryan, who'd promised forever then ghosted after Hudson's coming out post went viral in their friend group. The betrayal a public flaying that left Hudson swearing off vulnerability. But Victor's story was a lantern in the fog, illuminating that love's worth the risk. The scars a map to something truer. The next weeks blurred into a ritual. Hudson commuting from his graphic design gig at a Soho ad agency, armed with takeout from Victor's favorite deli. Pastrami on rye, extra sauerkraut to coax out the rest. Victor rallied, the Parkinson's a fickle beast, his tales branching into side stories. The drag queen who'd saved his ass during a '70s raid, the anonymous donor who'd funded Tommy's experimental AZT trial. Hudson recorded them on his phone, the device a bridge across generations. His questions probing deeper: how did it feel? Loving in secret? Did the hate ever win? Never fully, Victor would say, eyes twinkling. Hate's loud, but love's the baseline. Steady under the noise. The climax brewed on a crisp November morning, Hudson's birthday no less, when a man appeared at Willow Creek's front desk, mid-70s, wiry with a sailor's squint and a manila envelope clutched like contraband. "Tell Victor Hale his past just sailed in," he gruffed to the receptionist, who buzzed Hudson down from Victor's room. The visitor was Harlan, Elias's nephew, a retired tugboat captain from Alameda with a voice like foghorns and eyes that crinkled with Elias's mischief. He'd found Victor through a obituary clipping, Margaret's, cross-referenced with veterans' roles, and the envelope held Elias's bequest. A bundle of letters, yellowed and tied with twine, plus a tarnished locket with their photos pressed back to back. Victor's navy grin facing Elias's roguish wink. "I was 10 when Uncle Eli passed," Harlan explained over coffee in the sunroom, Hudson translating the shock for Victor via video call. "He made me swear to track you down someday. Said you were the love that got away. The one that taught him about fighting for what's right even when the world's wrong." Victor wept then, unashamed, the locket dangling from trembling fingers as Harlan recounted Elias's later years. The underground readings in the Castro, the mentorship of lost boys during the plague years, the quiet pride in knowing Victor had survived to tell, no, to live the tale. The revelation cascaded like dominoes, Harlan's visit unlocking floodgates Hudson hadn't known existed. Over the following months, Willow Creek transformed from sterile limbo to a salon of reckoning, Harlan shuttling up from the bay on Amtrak, bringing bootleg tapes of Elias's poetry slams, dog-eared copies of On the Road annotated in his uncle's scrawl. Victor devoured them, his frailty forgotten in the rush of resurrection. Dictating addendums to Hudson's recordings. Tell him about the time Eli and I snuck onto the Golden Gate at midnight, drunk on cheap Chianti, yelling haikus at the fog. Hudson wove it all into a tapestry, quitting his dead-end agency job to freelance on a passion project, a graphic novel titled Anchor's Fire, illustrated in bold inks that captured the grit of wartime foxholes and the glow of forbidden embraces. Victor's stories fueled the pages. Elias as the wild-hearted muse, Tommy the defiant spark, Margaret the unsung grace note. Hudson poured his own scars into the frame, Ryan's ghost as a shadowy antagonist, his tentative flirtations with a barista named Leo, all hazel eyes and hesitant smiles, a slow-burn echo of his grandfather's cautionary blaze. Conflict simmered beneath the harmony, as family fractures resurfaced. Hudson's aunt, Lydia, Jack's sister, ever the mediator, caught wind of the tell-all sessions via a loose-lipped aide, confronting Hudson at a tense diner meetup in Flushing. "Dad's mind is going, Hud," she hissed over cooling eggs, her pearls a stranglehold. "You're exploiting his delusions for some queer memoir? What about Mom's memory? The grandkids?" The word stung, a fresh betrayal laced with the old poisons, homophobia dressed in concern, the family's default armor. Hudson fired back, voice steady for the first time. "Grandma knew more than you think. And this isn't exploitation. It's exhuming truth. Grandpa hid for you, for Dad, for all of us. Time we stopped burying him alive." Lydia stormed out, but the seed cracked. Weeks later, an email arrived, halting apology attached to scanned photos. Margaret in a 60s pantsuit, arm around a young Victor at a civil rights rally, her eyes alight with a solidarity unspoken. "She suspected," Lydia wrote. "Loved him anyway." Maybe that's the real story. The novel's climax mirrored Victor's own. A launch party in a repurposed Brooklyn warehouse. Fairy lights strung like constellations against exposed brick. The air humming with craft IPAs and indie folk drums. Hudson stood at the podium, heart jackhammering, as 80 Souls activists, nursing home volunteers, Leo with a shy grin in the front row, leaned in. Victor, wheeled in by Harlan, clutched the locket like a talisman, his presence the event's quiet thunder. "I wrote this for the men who loved in silence," Hudson began, voice cracking on the edge of the hook that had snared him months prior, the Polaroid's defiant smiles. "For my grandfather, who hid a love story deeper than oceans, only to find it resurfacing in a nursing home bed. This is Anchor's Fire, not tragedy, but testament." He read from the high drama core, Elias's deathbed vow, Victor's barroom renaissance, the raid that nearly broke them. Gasps rippled, tears flowed, and when Hudson reached the betrayal's nadir, Jack's fists, Tommy's fade, a hush fell, broken only by Victor's applause, frail palms smacking with revolutionary fervor. After, in the crush of signings and hugs, Leo approached, his hand warm on Hudson's elbow. "Your words. They hit like home," he said, hazel eyes locking with the same pull Victor had described. "Dinner sometime? No pressure. Just stars and wind." Hudson nodded, the yes a small detonation, as across the room, Harlan helped Victor into a taxi bound for Willow Creek. The old man paused, beckoning Hudson over. "You did it, boy. Told the story right. Messy, human, alive." He pressed the locket into Hudson's palm, the metal warm from his skin. Keep it. Elias would have wanted you to chase your own anchor. The cab pulled away, tail lights winking into the night, and Hudson stood under the warehouse awning, rain-kissed air carrying the faint jazz riff from a passing car. Betrayal's echoes lingered, the silences, the blows, the loves lost to fear, but so did the redemptions. Victor's unburdening, Lydia's olive branch, the novel's quiet sales spiking on queer-lit forums, readers emailing tales of their own hidden grandfathers. Months later, as winter thawed into a tentative spring, Hudson visited Willow Creek with Leo in tow, the two of them bearing tulips and a prototype of the graphic novel's sequel, Victor's Idea, a prequel tracing Elias's Castro days. Victor had declined, steady but fading, his eyes brighter than in months. Brought the new blood. He teased Leo, the appraisal grandfatherly, proving. They sat in the sunroom, sunlight slanting through blinds like golden bars of freedom, trading stories, Leo's coming-out road trip across the Southwest, Victor's one regretful tale of a missed Fleetwood Mac show in '77. As evening fell, Victor grew pensive, summoning Hudson close. The end ain't neat, Hud. No bows on the pain. But human, that's in the trying, the loving anyway, the telling till your voice gives out. He passed quietly 2 weeks later. In his sleep, the locket around his neck, a half-smile on lips that had finally spoken their truth. The funeral was a mosaic. Family in pews, Harlan reciting Kerouac at the graveside, Hudson's eulogy a distilled chapter from the book. He hid to protect us, but in revealing, he freed us all. Leo held his hand through the sobs, a steady anchor in the gale. In the aftermath, Hudson finished the novel, dedicating it to Victor and Elias, Tommy and Margaret, the loves that built us, brick by hidden brick. Sales hummed, reviews praising its raw Americana heart, and invitations poured in, readings at queer bookstores in Provincetown, panels on intergenerational trauma at UCLA. But the real humanism bloomed quieter. Letters from readers, a teen in Tulsa who'd outed himself after reading, an uncle in Chicago piecing together his own Polaroid puzzle. Hudson and Leo moved in together that summer, a walk-up in Williamsburg with bay windows overlooking the East River, where they hosted Sunday brunches laced with Victor's pastrami recipe and Elias's haikus scratched on napkins. Betrayal's shadow lingered, Ryan's occasional DMs, family dinners with Lydia's awkward grace notes, but it paled against the light. Hudson's sketches evolving into animations, Leo's barista gig funding night classes in poetry, their love a deliberate rebellion, unhurried and profound. On the first anniversary of Victor's passing, Hudson scattered ashes at the Adirondacks Lake. Half Victor's, half Elias's, procured from Harlan in a clandestine swap. The water lapped greedy, carrying their mingled dust into the current, and as dragonflies skimmed the surface, Hudson felt the full circle. Not erasure, but evolution. The old man's hidden story hadn't ended in tragedy or tidy happily ever after. It had rippled outward, humanizing the fractures, proving that in America's vast, flawed tapestry, even buried threads could weave something luminous. And in the quiet evenings, with Leo's head on his shoulder and the city humming beyond the glass, Hudson would trace the locket's engraving, "Eternal Anchor," whispering thanks to the stars that had aligned, however belatedly, to let the fire burn free.